What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about a book that I read yesterday, Jupiter's Legacy, Volume 1. This collects the 5-issue Jupiter's Legacy series, and it is written by Mark Millar, or Miller, I don't know how to say his name, and drawn by Frank Quitely. And the basic premise of this story is you have 5 or 6 people in the early 1930s who discover this island. One of them, it came to him in a dream, and they go to this island where they get superpowers. And then they are the first superheroes, and they basically start off this golden age that lasts for 50 years. And then you cut forward to the present day, and they're all quite a bit older, and 2 of them, basically the Superman and Wonder Woman of this universe, they have 2 kids. And then you're kind of seeing things in the present day and how things are very different than they were in the early 1930s, and how both of these kids are kind of having issues with their parents, and how they don't really they're not fitting in with their parents' expectations, and their parents have very different expectations of their kids than the rest of the world, stuff like that. And then the main plot, I guess you could say, the A-plot, is that this is kind of like another version of Miller or Millar's Civil War. Civil War, of course, was a Marvel Comics story about Captain America and superheroes who did not want to hand their secret identities over to the government, and Tony Stark, Iron Man, who felt that the government needed to know everything about these superheroes before letting them go out and risk their lives and risk the lives of other people. And that was kind of the motives behind Civil War. The motives here is that you have the Utopian. He is the father of these 2 on the cover, and he's kind of the Superman of this world. He believes that superheroes need to just stay out of the affairs of the real world. If a bad guy comes and wants to blow up the planet, superheroes need to go and fight that bad guy. But he doesn't think that they need to get involved in politics. And as of this story, his brother Walter is like, you know what, the world is very broken. Things are getting just as bad as they were in 1929. Politics are not working. The politicians, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to fix things. We need to help them. We need to use our powers to save this planet. And the Utopian, he kind of has a valid point, because if these superheroes jump in and they start to fix the world, it's a very slippery slope, and soon it will be very easy for them to become tyrants who just rule the world. And he keeps saying, we need to be servants to these people. We don't need to let them become our servants. And Walter, his brother, also kind of has a valid point. If you have the power to fix things and make things better, and you're not using that power to make things better, then you're kind of abusing your powers. It's kind of the whole with great power comes great responsibility thing. Although in this case, if you have the power to fix the economy so that there is no more poverty or war, and you're not doing that, then you're being very irresponsible with your power. They both have very valid points here, but the problem that I have with this is sort of the same problem that I have with Civil War, in that both sides aren't as much portrayed sympathetically. They're both portrayed evenly, but they are both portrayed as being jerks. They both at times have very valid points of view, but I've never really felt sorry for either one of these guys. I never really felt 100% behind either one of them. It wasn't until close to the end of the book that I started to identify with any of the characters in this book at all. And that's another thing that I should talk about. The story here is paced very slow. This is a 5-issue miniseries, or I don't know if it's a miniseries or if it's the first 5 issues of an ongoing series. But when I first got this, I was under the impression that this was all that there was, that this was the story. But this is the beginning of a story. This is like Act 1 of a much larger story. And so out of 5 issues, it's not until the very end of issue 2 when the main meat of the story, this superhero Civil War kind of thing, really kicks off. And I don't want to spoil too much, but it doesn't exactly happen like Marvel Civil War, where there's an even 2 sides who are constantly fighting each other, and there's a give and take of, okay, these guys lost this guy, and these guys lost this person. It's not really like that. It's more this group of people, they kind of come out of nowhere, and then suddenly things are very different. Without spoiling too much, but I guess I may have just spoiled a little bit. But I will say this is a 5-issue miniseries, and it ends on a huge cliffhanger. When I got to the cliffhanger here, I was like, all right, what happens next? And then I turned the page, and it's a whole bunch of variant covers by different artists. And I was crushed because, A, this is by Mark Millar, and usually I'm not a huge fan of Mark Miller, or Millar, whatever. Usually I'll read something that he writes and I'm thinking, okay, that's all right, but a friend of mine once said Mark Millar is the Michael Bay of comics. He is out there trying to be edgy and cool, and he's trying to push himself as being this really modern writer, but most of the time the stuff that he is doing feels like something that a 13-year-old would create. I can think of loads of examples where that's the case. In this case, at times I can see that Millar shining through, but then at other times I can see a much less cynical version of that Millar shining through. The parts that are set in the 1930s, those are some of the most interesting pieces, which is really good for me because at the end of this book, there's an advertisement for a prequel series, a 12-issue miniseries called Jupiter's Circle, and so I'm really interested in reading that series, and the first volume is going to be coming out like very soon. I've already pre-ordered it, so that's very excellent news for me that there's going to be a prequel series focusing on some of the stuff that I was really interested in, but that's kind of also problematic because this book ends on a cliffhanger, and then the next book to come out is a prequel, and I don't know if both books of the prequel are going to come out before Volume 2 of Jupiter's Legacy. I have no idea, but that kind of, I wish that we could go ahead and get Volume 2 of Jupiter's Legacy so that I could see what happens next, and I'm afraid that it's going to be like 2 years before I can read what happens next to these characters. But getting back to Millar and kind of his style of being a 13-year-old boy who thinks that explosions and well-rounded women are really awesome, and when I say well-rounded, I don't mean their personality. Getting back to that, this book at times feels very much like that, but I think also it's Millar trying to say this is the way the superhero world looks in the present day. He's not necessarily condoning all of that stuff here. When one of the main characters overdoses on alien cocaine, he's not condoning that. He's not saying, yeah, this is me trying to be edgy. He's basically saying this is the worst that a character is going to go through before they become better, before they become a better person. And we do get to see a less cynical version of what I feel like is Millar's worldview popping in near the end of this book. And I'm going to be very interested to see Volume 2 to see if that continues, if we continue to get to see more of an optimistic view of superheroes and the world as the rest of the story continues. So I really enjoyed Jupiter's Legacy. I knew almost nothing about it going into it. In fact, I do want to say this cover, while I love Frank Quitely's art most of the time, this cover is really boring and bland and doesn't tell you anything about the story at all. Because I knew nothing about this going in. The only reason that I bought this was because Frank Quitely, and then on a lesser note, Mark Millar. And so I ended up really enjoying it a lot more than I thought I would, and I am definitely looking forward to everything else that comes out in this world, both the prequel, Jupiter's Circle, and Volume 2 of Jupiter's Legacy, whenever it comes out. I'm definitely looking forward to all of that, and I hope that I was able to convince you guys to pick this book up, maybe pick up the prequel, Jupiter's Circle. If this doesn't sound like something you might enjoy, Jupiter's Circle probably would be something you would enjoy. It's much more of a, well, from what I could see in this book and all these flashbacks presented here, Jupiter's Circle looks like it's going to be much more of an old-school superhero story, which is something that I would very much like to see, but since it's going to be by Millar, who knows? But those are my thoughts on Jupiter's Legacy Volume 1. I hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll be back later in the week with some other kinds of videos. In the meantime, I'll see you guys later. Have a great rest of the day.